again, I'm Doug Smith, and this is a special edition of Portsmouth This Week. Our special guest today is Representative Dennis Canario, Deputy Majority Leader of District 71, Portsmouth, Tiverton, and Little Compton. Welcome to the show, Dennis.
Good morning. Thank you.
Before we get involved in the current legislation and things, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your background and experience.
Sure. I have spent basically my most of my entire life dedicated to public service. I went to the police academy at a very young age and joined the Portsmouth Police Department. And I spent 20 years in the Portsmouth Police Department after retiring. I went on to the Portsmouth Town Council, where I served 3 terms. And then I went on to be a state representative. I truly enjoy serving the public. It's something that I've always done, my whole life, and I'm very humble to be in the position that I'm at. And I enjoy public service. It's a great venture.
Well, that's good. You do it well.
Thank you, sir.
So, how long have you been a District 71 rep?
I've been. This is my second term. I've
Okay.
been there since 2012, and like I said, it's really been a very humbling experience.
I bet it's very complicated from a resident perspective, anyway.
It is. I mean, when you first get in, you spend your first 2 years really learning,
Trying to figure out how to do it,
how to maneuver and how to get around, how to get things done, and learn the formalities and so forth and so on. So your second term is when you start to show and produce results because you've gone past that learning stage. So
yeah, I would imagine that's the case. What committees do you currently sit on in the House?
I actually sit on 3 very important committees, Doug. I sit on the Judiciary Committee, I sit on the Health, Education, and Welfare Committees, and I sit on Veterans Affairs. So they're 3 very, very busy committees.
Yeah. Now, how does this committee system work? If you could kind of explain that.
Okay. Well, what happens is whenever a legislator submits a bill for consideration, it gets assigned to that particular committee. So if you submit something pertaining to, say, a traffic law, it would go to Judiciary, and anything to do with, obviously, health, education, and welfare, it goes to their respective committees. And what happens is the committees will hear that particular piece of legislation. And this is the time where various people will come in and give their input on a particular piece of legislation. And everybody gets to voice their opinion and bring in their prospect and their view. All bills get held for further study when they come into the committee. And what that does is, after the committee hears everybody's input, then what happens is a lot of times they'll round table it, and they will come out with what they call a sub-A. They take people's inputs, people can agree on things, they'll come out with a sub-A. It'll come back to the committee, and at that time the committee would possibly vote it out to the floor for consideration. Sometimes those bills don't get voted out because there isn't an agreement that has come upon, and people can't seem to come together on a particular piece of legislation, and therefore so-called dies in committee.
Okay, so these committees are very important then for any legislation, it sounds like.
Absolutely. I mean, it gives the public their time to come in and testify and give their important perspective on any piece of legislation.
Yeah. Probably a little bit different from when you were a town councilor, I would think.
Oh, absolutely.
And they email you the backup.
Night and day.
Yeah, I bet. So you have a little bit of homework to do.
Yeah.
What are your own particular interests and concerns in state government yourself?
Personally, I am a very strong advocate for the elderly and the disabled and the veterans. I've always been a strong advocate for those groups of folks, and I've been fortunate enough to pass some bills regarding some of those issues. And one of the things I've been advocating for is the pension relief for veterans. And as you know, the budget just came out yesterday. It's hot off the press. It's still in my car, which I'm going to be looking over.
I just saw the Providence Journal, I think, article, or maybe it was the Newport Daily News on that legislation. Right. And it seemed to me that it didn't really address what many of us veterans hoped it would address.
Well, they're actually having a talk about this afternoon at the State House, a budget briefing, so we can all grasp, why it came to this and what the reasons are. And So we get to talk about that this afternoon, because certainly my position going into this is I advocated for 100% tax relief for veterans, and I think I've always been a strong advocate for that. So this afternoon, I think there'll be answers to questions that I have as well.
You know, one of my concerns as a veteran, as I say, is when I read the article, it said nothing about veterans specifically. It was almost like this is just a bill to lessen taxes on retirement income.
Well, you know, it's always been my position is this, Doug, is that I've always advocated, and I will continue to advocate for the tax relief for veterans 100%. And my position is I've always and will advocate for pension retirement period in the state, so that we can become a tax-free state, so that we can become competitive down the road. And I will continue to advocate for that.
No, and I understand that. I just myself feel that the life of a military guy is a lot different from, you know, somebody
I agree.
working for the state or whatever, and I just think that it should be recognized.
I agree.
Especially since we're one of the few, I guess there's only one or two other states that still do this.
Yes, sir.
That still taxes.
I agree.
Well, good. I look forward to having you up there as our advocate then.
Thank you, sir.
How about legislation that you've recently sponsored?
One of the pieces of legislation that I sponsored that was passed was to form a legislative House committee to study startup business processes within the state, so that we can form a commission, and that way we can study commission to provide recommendations and for streamlining new businesses in the state. You know, we've heard from the public, we've heard from businesses that Rhode Island can be quite difficult in terms of getting a business startup.
Yes.
And we need to, as legislators, come to the table and figure out what is it we can do to streamline this process. We've talked about it long enough. We need to start doing something about it. And this is why this commission takes folks from the private sector, from the corporate sector, and most importantly, from the legislature. We need to be involved in this, because we need to know going into the session what we need to do. And I think bringing collaboratively together these group of very important people, we can get this going and get it going rather quickly.
Yeah, when I was on the Economic Development Committee here in Portsmouth, this was one of the key issues that we brought up. And I know when Bill Clark was the business director for the town, he was trying to push reform in the area of permitting and things for new businesses. And I understand we're currently working with the Commerce RI on a similar kind of study to what you're talking about at the state, with the goal of streamlining these things. One of the issues I think that's got to be overcome perhaps in this thing is that you're talking at the state level, and yet every town's got the same kind of issue going, and they have their own set of permitting rules.
Right, and I think what we need to do is we need to take a look at how we can strategically move this forward in terms of getting the cities and towns together. I mean, as simple as something like the building permit. You know, we should be all on the same page with that, so that everybody has a streamlined process to get from point A to point B.
Right.
You know, and this is why we need to get like the City of Leagues and Towns together, so that we can pull this together rather quickly. And something like this hasn't been done, to my knowledge, in the past, and that's why I pushed for this commission, because we need to involve the cities and towns as well as the small business and the corporate. We need to pull everybody together.
Well, I think that's a winning idea and something that we really need to push for. So I applaud you for doing that.
Thank you.
We're also very interested here in Portsmouth in the tax stabilization law.
Mm-hmm.
And the good thing about this for us, it would provide economic zone type benefits for everybody in Portsmouth. I believe you sponsored the House version of that bill.
I did. And what happened with this, Doug, is normally when a town puts forth a request for a piece of legislation, it goes through rather quickly. And what happened with this piece of particular legislation is actually good, because it brought people together to work out issues like we just discussed, what happens in committee, People gave their opinion. They made some corrections. So what happened was, it came before the committee. It went back to the town. It came back to came back to the Senate. The Senate redid it. So it was a rather extra long process than normally it would take. So to bring you up to speed as to where it is now, once it passed the Senate as a sub A2, with all the corrections and so forth, what I did was I mirrored that version in the House side, and that's being done as we speak, if it hasn't already been done yesterday, I believe. So we expect that to come out and get voted on.
And what do you think the prospects are, just personally?
I'm hoping it goes rather quickly and smoothly and without any issues.
Good. That's what we like to hear.
Because that's what we need.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You recently got another bill passed, which I didn't quite understand, and this probably comes from your police background, I would guess. It's H-7154, which talks about prohibitions on the use of prone restraint in certain facilities. Can you explain to a layman what that means?
This is an unknown to a lot of people, and thank you for bringing this up. As I stated earlier, I am a very huge advocate for those that are disabled. And for those of us that don't know what a prone restraint is, they use this, they have used this in the past to bring people to the ground, face down, sometimes causing asphyxia, and has caused death in dozens of cases throughout the country. And this is usually used in a setting where someone is unable to communicate, has a disability, and they are unable to communicate their feelings. So sometimes, because of the anxiety of not being able to communicate, they act out, and a caregiver's first response is bring that person to the ground. Okay, then you ask yourself, well, we've never had anybody die in Rhode Island from that. But here's the issue, Doug. You don't have to die from this. What happens is this can cause long-lasting and irreparable harm to that individual in acting out for many, many years.
Right.
I have had constituents in our district that have gone through prone restraint, and what happens is it's caused such mental anguish that it's going to take years and years and years of recovery. And this law is a very important law because it involves any licensed facility by the state that deals with...
Okay, so it's not just police.
Okay, this exempts police, and this exempts the training school and Bradley Hospital, where in a life and death situation, they have to bring them to a prone restraint.
Okay.
This, what we're talking about here, Doug, is a private, like a group home setting, in a facility like that, where they're treating our young men and women. I call them kids; they could be adults.
Yeah.
I would encourage anyone to go to stophurtingkids.com, and you will be floored by what you're going to see.
Yeah.
And hearing from parents, some from within our community, that will tell their story what happened to their child when they were put into prone restraint. Doug, being a parent of a child with disabilities, we take life for granted when we get up in the morning. We put on our shoes, we have our day ahead of us. We have A, B, C, and D to accomplish. There are many young men and women in today's world that get up in the morning that don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
It's what am I going to do today? They don't have the luxury of framing out the day like you have the luxury of doing.
Sure.
We are their voice. We have to advocate for those who can't.
Okay, now, what do other states do? Do other states have similar prohibitions?
Yes, there are other states. I didn't bring the list with me, but it is something that that is really, really important, that society needs to understand that this is a very, very serious situation.
Yeah, well, thank you for explaining, because I had no clue, and I'm hopeful it'll go through. It sounds like definitely something we need to have in the books. So thank you. Another issue, Portsmouth, we have a million issues, of course, and this is a perennial one. It's got to do with the maintenance of our roads here in Portsmouth, but also on the island, generally. And I think all of us were very disappointed when DOT had to sit down and say, we're going to spread everything out over the next 10 years, and we're going to have to delay a lot of much-needed projects in your areas. Is there anything you can do to help us there?
Absolutely.
Are you going to do it? Please do it.
Absolutely. Well, I'm here to say that Rep. Edwards and I have been working with DOT to prod them to get some projects going that were in queue, if you would. Okay. We went to DOT and we expressed the importance, the conditions of our roads. You know, we're a community where tourists use our roads a lot to get to Newport. Our roads are in shambles. I'm proud to say that the East Main Road project is slated to start in the fall.
Okay, that's good.
And we got them to agree to move forward with this.
That's the repaving of
the repaving, and I think there's some sidewalk work involved. I'm not sure, but it's going to start from Park Avenue and go south, you know, to Clements. But I don't know how far they'll get this year, but we were able to get them to move forward. So hopefully, with our fingers crossed, in the fall we'll start to see some work.
Okay, well, great, and thank you again for that. We have a lot to thank you guys for. I'm amazed.
I've been working real hard, Doug.
Well, that's good. We appreciate it. Speaking of DOT and money, there seems to be an awful lot of money put into this 610 connector project up in the Providence area, and I guess from a taxpayer standpoint, how do we keep this from becoming a big dig-like hole that we throw money into? I mean,
Doug, that's a very, very good statement, and that's a concern of mine as well. However, having said that, nothing has been carved in stone yet. I don't think they themselves know what they're going to do. In terms of, I know there's been some suggestions put out there about maybe having a boulevard type thing, and then you know, and then that there's been different things floated out there, and you know, Mr. Alviti has been doing a good job. I mean, he came into
he's the new DOT director.
He's the new DOT director, and he's been doing a great job. He's been actually going public every week in terms of, you know, what they're doing in stages and so forth. But right now, they've put a team together, a management team together. They're trying to come up with ideas on how to move forth with this. But certainly, you can be rest assured that I'll be watching this very carefully, because I do not want to see another big dig situation. And you know what? To be honest with you, Doug, I don't think Mr. Alviti does either.
No, I would hope he wouldn't. He's getting a lot of feedback.
He is. He's getting the public has clearly spoken on this issue, and I'm sure it's put them on notice.
Yeah, I think as a state, we've got to realize you cannot defer maintenance on these major infrastructure projects. And relating to that is the issue of revenues, which relates to the toll issue. Okay, I guess my first question is: do you really think that truck tolls are going to generate the money we think it's going to be?
As you know, Doug, I did not vote for the tolls.
Right.
I thought it was a bad idea, and this was one of my concerns going into this in a vote. You know, when this whole thing came about with the tolling, I really wasn't comfortable with it. And it was a long process. People wanted to know my opinion right up front. And you know, in a position that I'm in, and people that know me know that I do my due diligence very well before I make a decision. I've learned that if you make a quick decision, sometimes you may end up eating your words later. So I make sure that I do my due diligence, I listen to my constituents, and then I make my decision from there. I'm going to be honest with you, I was optimistic going into this that something was going to change. It wasn't just going to be the truck tolls. I thought, you know, something was going to come in so it wouldn't be like this, but it didn't. And my constituency was loud and clear. The things that I thought were going to happen didn't happen, and this is why I voted against the tolls, because I had the same feeling you did.
Yeah, and another part of that, of course, is the concern that these tolls, that this will not evolve into a car toll situation where everybody's paying these things.
Right, and I mean, it was written into the legislation, but you know, like anything else, you know, things can change, which I don't anticipate that happening.
I think there'd be a major pushback.
There would certainly be a major pushback on it, but Again, I still remain committed against the tolling. I was hopeful they were going to come up with a different funding formula for fixing our roads and bridges, and quite frankly, you know, I still don't agree with it, and we'll see what happens. But hope for the best.
You know, I also think, I mean, I'm kind of two different minds on this, because I also realize that nothing's free, and if you want to have decent roads, you have to pay for them somehow. And I think the big question in my mind is, how have these funds been managed in the past, and how can we do it better in the future? Well,
you know, that's a good question, Doug. I've always been a big advocate for restricted funding, and not for monies necessarily going into the general fund. And I don't blame this administration or the last administration. This goes back many administrations.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's that we've worked up to this point, as you know. And I think if our colleagues back then had worked more out of a restricted account, so that money could have maintained our roads and bridges all along the last 20, 30, 40 years, we wouldn't be in this situation. And I think everybody understands that. A lot of people dropped the ball back then, so now we're dealt with a deck of cards that, you know, don't show a good hand. So the administration acted in the way they thought was appropriate.
Yeah, and you know, I think I can understand saying, okay, it was all these guys before us, but I guess the key thing is to realize we got to come up with a plan that's going to work and change things if necessary to go forward, because we can't keep living like this.
No, we can't.
We can't have all these bridges that are in such terrible condition.
No.
And
there needs to be a long-term process in terms of funding our future maintenance of the roads, and I firmly believe that that going forth, it shouldn't come from tolling either. You know, there should be a direct. That's why we have certain fees that are paid over the road fees, taxes, gas taxes, and so forth. Once the obligations, because right now the gas tax, a lot of that money goes for prior obligations in terms of bonds. But once that's paid off, we need to put that into a restricted account so we can actually say we have a restricted account to maintain our roads going forth. Because you know what, we need to run the state like we would run our homes.
Well, and I would hope that they do that, what you're saying, as well as if they're going to run these truck tolls, those seem like they're going to go up at some point.
Right.
Because it's going to take all of this. Roads are expensive, and if you want to know if roads are important, you've been on Aquidneck Island in Portsmouth in the morning and in the afternoon. I mean, these little two-lane roads we got are crammed with people.
They are, and it's, you know, if you've noticed, Doug, that each year the volume of traffic increases on those roads.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And it's not mainly just, it's not just big trucks, it's just the amount of traffic.
Yeah.
You know, so we're seeing an increase in traffic throughout the years. So we need to be on our game. We need to budget for it, and we need to maintain the roads and bridges.
It's especially tough too, I think, in towns like Portsmouth. You know, we came from rural roots, and all of a sudden we get these two main arteries going right through us, and they're still the old two-lane roads.
Sure.
Or four-lane roads with no shoulders.
Well, you know, and one of the issues that we have is, and I don't know how DOT is going to address it, but if you remember years and years ago, Chase Road was cement. So underneath that pavement. So that's why you see those breaks every so often going across, because the expansion joints are coming through. Yeah. So, I mean, in order to do that road correctly, that cement would have to be taken up, which is a it's
not a cheap process.
It's not a cheap, that's probably a foot thick, you know, so there's a lot of work behind that.
Yeah, good. Well, keep your shoulders to the grindstone up there, buddy. Let me ask you a question, and I don't mean this to catch you unawares or anything, but I just wondered, is there anything you can tell us about Representative Gallison's quick resignation here?
Unfortunately, no. That whole situation is unfortunate, and you know, I don't know. I don't know any information. They don't tell us anything. Yeah. It was something that was handled by the state and the government. So all I know is we need to move. We need to move on. You know, we got a lot of good people up there trying to do a lot of good work, such as myself. I mean, I do my best for my constituency, and I'm going to continue to do that. And it's just unfortunate that you know, it gave us a black eye.
Well, and especially the longer we go without knowing what the story is, it just seems very strange that You know, we don't have, the stuff hasn't come out yet.
Well, it's not unusual because whenever we have the federal government that does an investigation like that, it typically takes months. I mean, you saw what happened with Gordon Fox.
Yeah.
It was several months before, because usually they'll convene a grand jury, typically, and they'll put the information before them. And so that's a process that takes a lot of time. And the government, to be honest with you, they're in no hurry to move anything forward because of, for any particular reason.
Well, see, in the meantime, we're down one representative up in the State House.
Correct.
Because Gallison represented us, too.
Yeah, correct.
Let me talk about another issue that kind of relates to this, I guess, is the grant program.
Sure.
And the legislative grants and the legislative service grants, I guess. There's two different kinds. I can tell you that the Portsmouth Historical Society recently got a $2,000 legislative grant, thanks to you and Representative Riley. And it's going to go to something that's desperately needed at the Historical Society, a dehumidifier for our museum. So there are organizations like that that can really use this money. It seemed it would be in the public interest to continue things like that.
Right.
Where do you think this thing is going?
Well, the community service grants are now, as you know, in the budget. So they've been.
Yeah, those are the big ones.
Those are the big ones. The community. Right. So we have about $2 million that are going to be used for legislative grants for purposes such as what you just brought up. Now, the grants the legislative grants that I got was, for Portsmouth, for the town of Little Compton, for small projects that they normally wouldn't have the money for. So, those types of things are much needed in my district anyway. Just for the example that
absolutely.
You gave. I mean, they rely on those small grants to help move projects forward that are very, very important to the community.
Yeah, and I think something like that, I wouldn't even care if there was more attention paid to these things or something, but I think there are some needs like that.
Oh, there are. There absolutely is. There's an absolute need for the small grants like that.
Okay, quick question. We're almost out of time. What's your position on the ethics bill, and what do you think we're going to see?
Let it go forward. Let the people vote on it.
Okay.
I'm for it.
Now, are we still talking about not being able to criticize people during a period or something?
Well, that was their concern, was the fact that people would fabricate things because it's an opponent,
But that's got penalties right there.
I have mixed feelings on that. You know, I mean, look, put it to the voters, put the legislation together, and move forward with it. Let the people decide. I think the people want this. At least my constituency has made their voice clear that they're interested in it. Let's go. Okay. Representative Dennis Canario, thanks so much for being on board today. And we'll look forward to having you on sometime later on. Sure, thank you. Sounds great. I've got a couple of quick community service announcements. Upcoming events. On the 18th of June, hazardous and electronic waste can be dropped off at the Portsmouth High School. On the 20th of June is the annual meeting of the Portsmouth Historical Society. That starts at 7 o'clock down at the Society. Come on down and see what we're doing down there. That's it for me, Doug Smith. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Portsmouth This Week.